Welcome, Kellogg community. I'm Michaela Doyle with the Kellogg School of Management. Thank you for joining us today for Conversations with Kellogg Leaders featuring Lisa Earnhardt. In this webinar series, Dean Corneli speaks with the Kellogg alumni leaders on timely issues and challenges facing the global business community. You can catch up on prior webinars in this series at our virtual events page on the Kellogg alumni website. We will put a link to that site into the chat now. Today's presentation will last 1 hour, and we invite you to submit questions for our speaker at any time using the Q&A icon that's located at the bottom of your screen. We will address audience questions throughout the conversation. With that, I am happy to welcome Dean Francesca Corneli.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. I'm so delighted to be here for another amazing conversation with another amazing alumna. I am sure you heard me a lot saying how at Kellogg, we have put healthcare as a priority. We've always been good. We think we are the best, and we will continue. And Lisa has been so crucial in helping us be at the frontiers and push in healthcare. She is the executive vice president and group president medical devices of Abbott Laboratories. She has had a very distinguished career combining healthcare and technology, which is really where the world is going and where we want to be and send out, hopefully, other leaders like her. So welcome, Lisa, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Francesca, thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you so much for the warm welcome as well.
Well, let's get into it because I'm sure people want to hear a lot. So as I'm saying, you've been a leader at the intersection of technology and healthcare for decades. Now, maybe now everybody knows it, but not when you started. So how did you discover the world of healthcare and technology?
Yeah, so I'm an engineer by training. That's what I did my undergraduate degree in. And after school, I went to the world of management consulting, a very popular path for many of our Kellogg alums. I did that actually before Kellogg, and worked in healthcare. And so it was a great opportunity to apply sort of the problem-solving skills of engineering in the world of healthcare. And then I went back to Kellogg. I was like, gosh, I love healthcare, but I want to be in a space that's moving more quickly. In fact, I thought I wanted to be just in pure technology. I did my summer internship at Dell and was like, okay, I'm going to do technology. And then I realized there was an opportunity to do both healthcare and technology in the field of medical devices. So that's the field I joined when I graduated from Kellogg in 1996, and ever since have not looked back.
That's amazing. What do you find most rewarding about it then?
For me, it's really the ability to make a big impact. And for that's what really motivates me, is being able to help millions of people around the world live better lives. It's as simple as that. So we all work hard at what we do, and there's so many different careers and ways to make a living and ways to have impact. And for me to be able to have such an impact on global health is incredibly rewarding.
That is true. You're definitely in an area where the impact is immeasurable.
It's quite visible, right? I actually have an opportunity to talk to customers, whether it be physician customers, folks who work at hospitals, or even some of the patients in which our technologies help benefit. And wow, what a difference we make for them. So that gets me up in the morning and keeps me going all day long.
I love that. I feel like it's very Kellogg, right? We want to have an impact on the world, and you can even talk to the people impacted.
I know. There are very few times where you can literally speak to your customers and have that kind of intimacy.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Now, before you, however, joined Abbott, right, and now you're leading a very large organization. My understanding, you started with a much smaller organization, and you were leading the medical implant startup called Intersect ENT, and you led it all its way to its IPO. Now, That's a very different kind of environment. How was your time there as a CEO of a startup, and how did it shape you, your leadership, your vision?
Yeah, you're right, Francesca. So out of business school, I went and did a big corporate job and sort of worked my way up the ladder, if you will, the proverbial corporate ladder. And so much of innovation, especially in our field, happens in the startup world. And actually live in the San Francisco Bay Area and a big ecosystem here. And so I took the kind of a big leap of faith, and making the move into the startup world. Took over for the founder. There were 12 employees at the time. Took it all the way through, and quite honestly, I thought I would be there, 3 years, 3 to 5 years. The majority of startups, as you know, fail, and so I figured I would learn and I'd have that experience, and then I would move on. And as it turned out, we just continued to have success. It was not at all a straight line, but we ended up getting to the point where we took the company public, and had just had a big impact in the world. And so there's definitely things I learned all along the way, and there's things I've been able to take now into my role at Abbott, which is very different in terms of scale and scope, but some of the things are very similar, in terms of the experiences that I had at Intersect. And I think it starts first with the customer, and really understanding their needs. That's so important in the startup world, to make sure you're really focused on something that's going to have an impact. And I think that focus is so important too. I mean, in the startup world, you're there and you're there to do one thing, and you may have a list of 10 things that you could do or maybe should do, but really, what's so important in the startup world is just having that relentless focus on kind of what's that next value driving milestone. And I think sometimes that focus can get lost in larger companies. And so what's great is being able to take that experience I had there. Other things critically important in the startup world, and just as critical for me now, is just the importance of the team, right? And so, as I said, there were 12 people when I started. In fact, when I was building my team, up until about 100 employees, I interviewed every single person. And part of that was not that necessarily I had expertise in manufacturing or R&D or finance, all the different functional areas, but I just recognized how important each individual person was to building our culture and to sort of becoming the company that we wanted to be. So that importance of team as well has really translated. And I think one last thing, I think it's where I really found my voice as an authentic communicator. I realize sometimes when you're in big companies, you have big audiences. You do this all the time, Francesca, where you're addressing thousands sometimes when you speak, right? And you're serving 60,000 global alumni around the world. But then you realize that you know, as a leader, people want to know you. They want to know you as a person. They want to really see you as you're real. You're authentic in your communication. I can trust you. I can believe in you. I'll follow you. And so it's all those things that I really think I learned sort of at Intersect when I was in that startup world, and as we continue to scale. And I try to keep with me every day in the work that I do here at Abbott.
Actually, that's an incredible insight, because usually people, our students, for example, think more like we go for a startup or you go for the corporate world, like it suits different people. But what you're saying is you can develop in a startup some skills that then if you can keep them in a corporate world,
Yeah.
really will give you so much more
Yeah,
success.
I think one of the things I really have tried to keep with me in the corporate world is the kind of the adaptability, the speed of decision making, that kind of the
Yes.
bias for action, which I think sometimes people think doesn't exist in the corporate world. And it's harder, obviously, just given the sheer size and scope and of the businesses and the markets in which we're serving. But those are exactly the kinds of things I've been trying to keep forward. So I've actually really, I think I've benefited as a leader. I've benefited as a person, sort of going back and forth between the corporate world and into the startup setting and vice versa.
That's great. That's great. So, okay, so you go from a startup, now you're at Abbott, which of course is a huge company and has been around for 135 years. But really, the part of medical device, I understand, is a more recent shift. So, but the business now is large, fast-growing segment. So, like you mentioned, and they help you at Abbott, right? How do you see that in practice? Because you're also making grow the segment.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Like, so Abbott historically has our roots in pharmaceuticals. So we've been around for over 135 years, founded not too far from Kellogg, as you know, just
That's
up the
what I
road.
hear.
Yeah,
Exactly.
we're headquartered in Lake Forest, and now we have a vast business, over 114,000 employees, not just in medical devices, but diagnostic, nutrition products, branded generics outside of the U.S. And so we have been very intentional as Abbott, sort of building our healthcare technology business. And it started over 20 years ago. But I think really where things transformed was with the acquisition of St. Jude Medical, which had happened in 2017. And that's part of the portfolio I lead. And for us now, it has really become we are the biggest part of Abbott. And I have the great fortune of working in areas where, I'm treating some of the most costly, debilitating conditions that impact us: cardiovascular disease, diabetes, chronic pain and movement disorders. And so it's been a joy for me. I took over from Robert Ford, who's now is the CEO, in my role, and part of it was taking what I learned in the startup world, the sort of the focus on innovation, the focus on the customer, that speed and agility, and really applying it to the portfolio of products and that we have at Abbott. And so it's been a fun journey. I can't believe it's been 5 years. Sometimes it feels like just a couple, and sometimes it feels like 20. Because, oh, by the way, there was that global pandemic that that impacted all of
Where
us.
you helped a lot, I understand, even
Excuse me?
you helped a lot with the
Yeah,
test
so
even
proud
there.
of everyone at Abbott and how we really stood up to the test, if you will, in
Yes.
terms of the role we played in diagnostic testing and making sure that people had kind of the answers they needed to live their life safely and securely.
I was very grateful. I do remember waiting for you to commercialize the product so I could
Yeah.
use it and have the student back in time. Yes. Now, let me ask you those. You mentioned how what you do really help doctors to deal with a chronic disease, which are so important. But I also understand that, like, like really Abbott is really leading the health tech convergence. So really helping people to understand their bodies, stay connected with the doctors, which sounds fascinating, such a transformation. So what are you doing? Is that how you help everybody to take control of their own health? That seems like really the future of health.
Yeah, and absolutely, Francesca. I really view this as a transformational time in healthcare and specifically in medtech. And I really see it as a move from our healthcare system today being really much more focused on sick care. And that's important, right? And the solutions we provide for people with heart disease or diabetes will always be critically important. But what we're really trying to do is empower people to take control over their health and help healthy people stay healthy. And so I really think technology has a tremendous opportunity to do just that. And it's a great example, actually, what we're launching right now. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but I will sort of give you a little background. We just
Yes.
launched one of the first consumer biowearables called Lingo. So think of the word lingo.
Yes.
It's understanding the language of your body, right? So
Oh,
it's actually a continuous glucose monitor that is tracking your glucose levels 24/7. So it's actually used today in a meaningful fashion for people with diabetes. They need to manage their sugar levels. Given their condition, there's 6 million people that rely on this technology every day around the globe. And what we found is that we started having some people using it to really hack their metabolism, if they will. And so it's an opportunity to really kind of understand what works for you. What choices could you make that might help you lead a healthier life, whether that be sleeping better, whether it be, losing some weight, whether it be maintaining an energy level. That's important for me. I used to have times in the afternoon, for example, that I felt like I need a little pick me up, after lunch and you're setting in, especially those long winters in Chicago. You'd start to doze off a bit or lose a little bit of energy. And it's been amazing what just making certain food choices or maybe going for a quick walk after you have lunch, that can really keep your sugar levels stable, your glucose levels stable, and what it can do for you. So that's just one example. If you're interested in learning more specifically about that product, I'd be remiss not to say don't go to hellolingo.com and you can learn more. But that's just one example about how we're really transforming the world of healthcare and really helping people, getting the information they need. And healthcare is so rich with data, right? I mean, it's
Yes.
unbelievable the amount of data that we have within the healthcare system. And our job really is to translate that data into information and then ultimately actionable insights. Right. And so that is a focus that we have at Abbott, just trying to, help people live their best lives. And we think that can really unleash a lot of power in the improvement of healthcare.
I mean, that sounds so exciting, and I can feel the passion in
Yeah.
your voice about that.
That's the engineer in me, Francesca. This is like literally, I was meant to do this. It's amazing when you find that
Yes.
calling, right?
Well, and okay, so let me be that is the engineer combined with the Kellogg wanted to have an impact, right? Because it's also
Yeah.
the passion, like it's an engineer with I mean, a lot of engineers have impact, but you're having impact on people's lives so much. And
It's
talking about that,
technology for good. It's
yeah,
no question about
engineer
it.
for good,
Technology for good.
exactly. And so so this is an amazing view. It looks so exciting. What else excites you about the future? What is it that you can tell us? I'm sure some stuff you can't tell us, but that
Yeah.
you can see coming. And
Yeah, I really think it's that convergence of health and technology. So I frame it in 3D. So I think about it as digitizing, democratizing, and decentralizing healthcare. So digitizing, it's sort of giving the power to sort of connecting people with their physicians and getting them accurate information, sort of empowering you. And that's what a great example of that is what I was talking about with Lingo, right? Democratization of healthcare is just, for me, an exciting kind of next frontier. And it's sort of making sure those who need healthcare have access. So that's things like we're doing is sort of making healthcare more convenient, making it personable, making it accessible. So things like virtual clinics and being able to sort of follow patients regardless of where they are around the world, be able to have visits with their healthcare providers from their living room. It's getting them information they need at their fingertips, oftentimes on your phones, right? It's amazing how you
absolutely,
could buy something on Amazon and have it the next day. But when with your healthcare, it isn't always as easy as a press of a button, right? And so that's really
absolutely.
democratizing and then ultimately decentralizing. And so it's really delivering care where and when it's needed and moving outside of the traditional four walls of the hospital or the clinic. And hospitals will never go away. There will still be a strong need for sick care and that expert care that you get in the hospital setting. But we really think about how do we bring care to people where and when they need it. So lots to be excited about in the world of healthcare. It's truly a transformative time.
Yeah, I can see that. And in the meantime, there are so many questions coming in. I just want to ask one, starting with one of the products you've developed over the years. Which are you most proud and why? You probably have a lot of choice to think of.
Yeah, there's a lot of choice. I'm going to give a great example of a product that we actually launched in the midst of the pandemic. And one of the reasons I'm so proud of it is just how the team was able to work so diligently with such speed in the midst of a global pandemic. And this is a product called Neurosphere. So by way of background, we have products that are called deep brain stimulators, basically pacemakers with wires that go to your heart that can control neurological disorders, something like Parkinson's disease or a movement disorder. Incredibly debilitating. So in the midst of the pandemic, we all didn't have the kind of access we needed to hospitals or clinics, right? We were at home.
Yes.
So we were, in fact, we were instructed many places not to leave the home. Well, as it turns out, people still needed care. And so what the team was able to do was develop a product and a suite of products called Neurosphere, which is allows, and it sort of goes beyond telemedicine. So, which is something as well that I think was always an idea and it was there, but boy, you never used to do a video call with a physician pre-pandemic.
Yes.
I never did. I just did one this morning with my internal medicine doctor. How efficient I could do that just sitting here in my
Yeah.
office. But you weren't doing that. But what this allowed us to do is take it a step further, is that we were able to then have the device itself instead of having coming into the office. And what's interesting about people with Parkinson's disease and the treatment there is there's probably 200 or so centers of excellence in the United States. And so typically a patient might live 150 miles or so from that center. So to be able to actually go in to see a physician, an expert, takes time out of work. It usually takes a family member because if you have Parkinson's disease, you're not able to drive on your own. It's a whole day adventure at least, right? And then you put a global pandemic on top of that.
Yes.
And so what we were able to do is actually now enable these people with Parkinson's who might have a deep brain stimulator, one of our devices, they can actually have their device checked. So you can actually do analytics and understand what's happening with that patient. And then you can actually change the prescription via the internet, via this, confidential, carefully encrypted tool to be able to change the prescription, which completely obviates the need for them to come into the hospital setting. So it was game changing. One of the reasons I'm so proud of it is obviously like hugely impactful for people with movement disorders because it's very challenging for them to come in. And it was at a time in the midst of an incredible, hopefully, knock on wood, a once in a lifetime experience.
Yes.
So that for the team to be able to work, to do the work, they had this vision, but they didn't think the healthcare world was ready for that vision to be able to sort of get therapy delivered remotely. And so to be able to do that work, to be able to get it approved by the regulators, to work with, in this case, CMS, to actually get it paid for, and to get physicians using it, and in particular getting people with Parkinson's disease using it and comfortable, literally seeing a physician and getting their device reprogrammed in their home setting, which just so proud of the work that team has done. And that's just one of many examples.
That is amazing. And actually, talking about speed, there is another question here, which is really, what have you found to be effective in increasing, in commas, the speed of decision making? How do you help the people who report to you make decisions faster without causing chaos?
Yeah, I think it's being okay with failure and being okay. Part of which is how you react when things don't go well, Francesca, right? And they won't all go well. And so part of it is like being not so risk averse that and sort of the reaction or what happens when things don't go well. So we're always going to learn from that. But then recognizing that, you're not punished for that. You want to make sure you're doing calculated risk. And so I think that's one element of that speed. And that's another thing is just, demonstrating it through action. So the pandemic was a great example. I mean, I think about the Herculean effort the team at Abbott had around the diagnostic testing, and talk about making big decisions, big investment decisions, risky investment decisions with imperfect information, right? Early on, we didn't know, really the early stages of, the pandemic, what the coronavirus was. Could we actually develop a test? Would it work? Could we scale? How would we commercialize it? And it was really having that conviction of beliefs. And so I think that's something we've been able to demonstrate at Abbott. And I'm hoping we continue to kind of harness that agility, because it's so important, especially in the dynamic times in which we're living.
That's very interesting. And here someone says, what major roadblock would you have that could slow you down versus instead accelerate on the other side, the healthcare digitization? And how do you plan to move on and overcome any roadblocks?
There are always roadblocks in terms of the technology side, right? But the good news is we'll figure that out. And that's not just us at Abbott, but as a space, we'll figure out the technology side. That's really not the biggest roadblock. And it ends up being more of, things around regulations of digital solutions. And then how do we pay for digital solutions? It sounds simple, but it's actually not. Because we have a certain way in which healthcare systems, incent and pay for behavior. And sometimes I'll give the sort of back to the example of seeing a patient for a visit remotely, right? You think, what a win, right? It's a win for the patient because they don't have to take time out of work. It's a win for the healthcare system because it tends to be more efficient, right? I didn't go into the clinic this morning. I didn't take up time of the receptionist and the nurse and the tech and the physician that saw me. It was a 10-minute video call. And it's oftentimes a win for the physician because they're able to see more patients, those types of things. Well, as it turns out, there's regulations around that. There's how does it get reimbursed? And we're not necessarily set up as a healthcare system to very quickly change how we operate. And so in terms of overcoming that, there's work that we need to do, not just as Abbott, but as an industry around advocating for changing policy and whether it be on the, with the FDA or CMS, the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services. And Francesca, we were just talking before the call about I was in Washington, D.C. twice in the last 6 weeks and doing that very thing because we owe it to the people we serve, and we owe it to the industry to make sure that we're educating all stakeholders, whether it be regulatory, political, administrative, providers, across the board.
Actually, connecting on that, I'm getting inundated with questions, but I just want to follow up on what you said with the question I had, which was, as you're saying, you have all these stakeholders, right? Doctors, patients, regulators, insurers. So given that complexity, what have you learned about to push through the innovation cycle to launch a new product? What have you learned?
Yeah, healthcare is complex. I mean, it clearly is a team sport. It's actually the perfect fit for a Kellogg leader, right? And innovation in the field is not linear by any stretch of the imagination. So I think it's the collaboration and involvement early and often with our various stakeholders, and that actually starts even within a company like Abbott, right? Because innovation, you have to have not just the research and development, the engineering and the scientists on board. It's the clinical scientists, regulatory, operations, quality, ultimately commercial. There are a lot of folks. It's truly a cross-functional effort. But then there's also the engagement with external stakeholders, which is just, if not more important, and that's the customers, the physicians, the hospital administrations, even the patients, and making sure we're getting that input. And then it's the regulators as well. And so it's one of the few industries where there are a lot of stakeholders that need to be involved every step of the way. And I think that's what sort of makes it a unique field in that way. But then it just makes it, when you are able to kind of break through with innovation, it just makes it even that much more rewarding because you realize the degree of difficulty is pretty high to bring innovation through, just given the technical risk, the clinical risk, the regulatory risk, the payment risk. and getting everyone moving in the same direction. But I'm a big believer in communication early and often, and collaboration, and just recognizing at the end of the day, if you're all focused on the right thing, which is improving outcomes, improving people's lives,
Yeah.
if you kind of keep that as your North Star, everyone will sort of rally behind that. You just have to continue to remember, like, at the end of the day, we're trying to help improve the lives of people around the globe. And if you keep that North Star there, it helps, oftentimes break down the barriers and get people focused on not why something won't work, but how it can work.
Can work. And talking about that, there's a question here and the person putting the question also commented on your biodesign textbook, loving your biodesign textbook, I think is behind. But let me ask you the question. So your thoughts on innovation in the Medtech sector, mentioning that small businesses have been the source of great innovation. The major strategics can acquire and distribute globally. However, early stage capital these days is difficult to secure. And what role does or can Abbott play in addressing this unmet need? Can you do corporate venture capital investing, build to buy initiatives? What do you think can you do about that?
Yeah. And Francesca, I'll just comment first on that first part of your comment, which is where the innovation happening external in the startup world. And that does happen. But I would say at Abbott, we're really trying to control our own destiny and innovate ourselves. And we have some great examples of that. Like, for example, FreeStyle Libre, which is the continuous glucose monitor I mentioned before, which is probably one of the world's most successful medical devices. That's something that Abbott developed on our own. So, we're always trying to make sure we keep that innovative spirit, because it's so core to who we are, and who's better, because we have such a deep understanding of our customers, just given our breadth and depth of our businesses. But that said, there is the innovation ecosystem is critically important, and we do a lot of things to help support that and invest in it. And so it is directly investing in startups through our venture arm. It's doing things like build to buy, where we may partner with an external party and with certain milestones and goals, and say, if you do A, B, and C, we'll ultimately acquire this for X. It's all of those types of things. We're even thinking more creatively around joint ventures and partnerships, recognizing, to my point earlier, healthcare being a team sport, that we can't always do things on our own. So, for example, in our diabetes care platform, FreeStyle Libre is the continuous glucose monitor. Oftentimes, people, especially with type 1 diabetes, need insulin, and they rely on insulin pumps. And so we don't have an insulin pump of our own, but now we're actually working on being connected. We've got partnerships with 4 other, the largest major insulin pump providers. So that's another way in which we're innovating, where it's just, and typically people wouldn't think as kind of big companies collaborating. In fact, I just announced a partnership a few months ago with Medtronic, which actually happens to be my largest competitor. And so I think we took the whole field by surprise, but they actually are a leader in insulin pumps. And we felt like the right thing for people with diabetes was to link up FreeStyle Libre with their leading insulin pump. And I had to put my pride aside and all of those things, but it was the right thing for the field of diabetes. It was the right thing for the people we serve. And so that, there's all different kinds of ways we can invest, from the very early stage all the way to partnering with some of the largest players in the field of healthcare.
That's a great message about keeping your Northern Star, as you were mentioning. Yes. So where do you go to look for new ideas, unmet needs? Because you do clearly a lot of innovation, but, how do you decide? How do you get an idea?
Yeah, It's all over. I think it starts first with our customer, Francesca, and really understanding what their unmet needs are. And so it's hearing from them, it's observing them. And in fact, sometimes I actually go out and spend time in the operating room, in the cath lab, in the clinic, just seeing. And I'm just one piece of it, but I have 40,000 people on my team, right? And many of them are engineers who are spending time with our customers, observing. And I mention that specifically because we can do market research and we can hear from them quantitatively, qualitatively what their needs are. But sometimes it's actually what they're not saying. And that observing and actually seeing what works, what doesn't work. In their system, because sometimes I think we should have just accept, oh, that's just the way it is. And it's like, oh my goodness, it's amazing when you put engineers sitting alongside healthcare professionals, what they're able to see and observe, and what they're able to innovate. And so it comes from a lot of different places. It comes from great academic centers like Northwestern and partnering with thought leaders there. And so we're continuing to make sure we'll partner with some of the best and the brightest. And sometimes it's folks who are maybe outside of the box. And so that's one of the things being here in the San Francisco Bay Area is I'm not too far. I look down the road and I see a number of thought leaders in the field of big tech, right? And there's a lot I can learn from them, for example, on AI and machine learning. And so there's a lot of different places where we get our ideas and where we choose to collaborate.
Yes. So are you going to plan to use the potential of AI, given that everybody is wondering how to use it, how to incorporate it?
Yeah, I mean, I think and we already are, right? So we already are. We have vast data sets that we can apply machine learning and AI that can really help identify patterns in the body. We're sort of working on different algorithms that help ultimately, it can help, clinicians help improve the care that they are delivering. It can actually help ultimately predict and ultimately prevent disease to happen. And so those are all things we're working on. And some of those we're working with external partners. So it's important to recognize that field is moving very quickly and there's just tremendous potential.
There's a lot of interesting questions coming. Let me read in this one. This says, considering Abbott's global presence, how do you see the European healthcare market evolving, especially with regard to the adoption of Medtech innovation like biowearables, of remote patient monitoring? Are there unique challenges or opportunity that you've observed in Europe compared to the US or other regions? Like, how much geography matters?
Yeah, it does. I mean, we are a global company, right?
Yes.
But then you realize healthcare truly is local. And so there's differences in how healthcare is delivered globally. That's important. There's also difference in how healthcare and I'll just say health information is governed. And so like Europe, for example, you mentioned that. There's different privacy requirements there, that we're working, and we respect that, I mentioned we have a lot of data and we treat people's data with the utmost care because people entrust us with their health. And so we want to make sure we're doing all we can to protect their information. And so Europe is one of the areas, and you realize it's, every market in Europe is, its own market, right? Even as it relates to things like the healthcare system and how things get paid. I might get a approval to sell a product in Europe, but until I work with each individual country and within their country's different provinces, and it's a important work to be done.
Yes, as an Italian, I know very well what you're talking about.
Exactly.
Here, there's other interesting question. So let's say, like for devices like, let's say, Lingo, right? How much do you sell through doctors and hospital system? Are you thinking about selling direct to consumer? What are the biggest challenges of doing that?
Yeah, and that's what I think is the kind of the next phase of healthcare. Traditionally, currently today, the vast majority of my products at Abbott are purchased by a hospital system or a healthcare system, and the decision is oftentimes made by a physician. In the future, we really see the consumer playing a bigger role. And we're in a unique position at Abbott is that we do have some products, our nutrition products, Ensure or Pedialyte. Those are healthcare products, but the consumer is making to choose them for their nutritional needs. Something like the COVID test, the Buy Next Now, right? So great experience that we have within Abbott around consumer healthcare. And that's what I'm doing with Lingo is actually Lingo is we're selling directly to consumers. And so that's a very different approach for us. And so, the good news is I'm able to leverage some of the know-how we have from other areas of Abbott. And then we've also hired folks from the consumer world into medical devices. And I think we're just at the very beginning of this. And, I'm hopeful we see a world 20, 30 years from now where as consumers, you're much more empowered to make decisions around your own health, and that you're a big part of the decision-making process.
Actually, there was some question at the beginning about how much, incentivizing people to do preventative care can change your entire business model.
Yeah, and that for me is the big sort of unlock. If you think about kind of bending the curve as it relates to healthcare spend, is what can we do to help, as I said, healthy people stay healthy, like that prevention. And so those are the things we're working on. And I think the FreeStyle Libre is a great example, right? That's for people with diabetes to the extent that they can, for pre-diabetics, or you can actually help people avoid becoming diabetic by managing your glucose levels and being aware of what different choices around nutrition and exercise and sleep can do for you. And so I do believe that is the future. Consumer biowearables will be a big part of that, whether it be a glucose sensor, it can be tracking your heart rhythm. Look at me today. I have my Oura Ring, I have my Apple Watch, I have my Lingo on the back of my arm. I talk about walking the talk, but I think it's so important because at the end of the day, like, who cares about your health more than you, Francesca? So why aren't we giving you the information you need to live your best life? Why should it be, it's even something with your medical record, right? Historically, you would never have access to your medical record. And having just had an appointment with my physician this morning, and they sent me my after visit summary, so I could see how she documented it and what my next steps are. And that kind of information gives me control and a feeling of confidence that, yes, I can do this.
Absolutely, absolutely. And here there's I will never be able to ask you all the questions arriving in, but just how critical is consultation with clinicians before Abbott makes business decisions?
The consultation and consulting work that we do with clinicians is the most important input we have to our innovation cycle. It is the most important thing that we do because the investments we make from a product development, what it takes from getting a product from an idea all the way to a commercial launch could literally be tens of millions, in some cases, hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And so making sure we really understand customer needs early on, and then as we're making trade-offs in terms of design and development, in terms of the clinical studies that we run and the research that we do, we can't do it alone. So it is by far the most important input that we have. And we've historically, as I said, relied almost squarely on clinician input. We're starting to rely a lot more, in addition to physician input from patients and input from healthcare administrators and payers, sort of the broader range of stakeholders, sort of earlier in our innovation cycles.
So I was going to ask you a question. Also, I wanted to, because I can see the time is running very fast, a little bit also about you as a leader. And there's a question I wanted to ask you about how you recruit. And actually, there is a question here saying, like, what do you think are the most important qualities for leaders today? And what qualities or skills do you look for in the people you hire?
Yeah. So we recruit people around the globe, just given this scale and
Imagine, yeah.
scope of our business. And obviously we have all of the roles for engineers and data architects and technical all the way to commercial. And so we're looking for people who really want to make a difference in the work that we do, and having that global perspective as well is highly valuable to us, because we are solving global health challenges. So we need to make sure we understand the needs of our customers, not just locally, but also recognizing, as we were talking to, the differences in healthcare systems around the globe. So that kind of diversity of perspective really inspires that innovation. And so in terms of what we're looking for in leaders, it's folks who really do, first off, have a passion and desire to make an impact. I always say that you just can't, you have to really, in my mind, that's the most important thing we do, because it's so hard. The work we do is so hard. I want someone who really, really cares and just is so committed to the North Star, or the greater cause. And for us, it's that helping people live their best lives. And then I think it's a lot of the same great leadership things we look for, in terms of folks who are able to listen, and who can help, who are leaders in terms of collaboration and pulling diverse perspectives together, and moving the team forward. I do think things like agility and empathy are two things that I have spent more time on, as I think about leaders of the future. Agility, just because the world is moving even faster, and there are a lot of things that we think might happen, and the world is changing very quickly. And so I think the ability to not just understand what it takes to be successful in today's world, but to be prepared to kind of shape the future, and be able to sort of pivot, and being resilient is so important. And I mentioned empathy as a leader, because that's something, quite honestly, I did not used to think about as a leadership trait per se. I thought as a person I was empathetic, but I never thought as a leader how important that would be. And it wasn't until sort of the midst of the pandemic that really highlighted the importance of that in the world in which we're living today. And I think it took a global pandemic for me to understand the importance of empathy in interacting with customers, with interacting with employers, interacting with other stakeholders externally, because for me, it just makes you a better leader to be able to lead with empathy. And the pandemic it really challenged me, because you didn't know, you were talking with people like this, right, remotely. You didn't know what was happening in the background. You didn't know if they had a sick family member, or if they were dealing with a crisis of their own. And I just think in today's world, having sort of empathy kind of core to who you are as a leader is important.
That is amazing and so very Kellogg. I love it, because when you talk about agility and empathy is really what we try to teach. And I love it, because when I talk to people like you, I can always say, see, we've had these have been the Kellogg values forever. And when people join our amazing network of alumni, they meet people who value exactly the values like empathy. There is a question here that also says, what do you know now that you wish you knew earlier in your career, and why?
I know one thing is, I don't need to have all the answers. I think earlier in my career, I would sometimes hold myself back, or not have the conviction around some of my ideas, because I just didn't have all the answers. It all lined up. And so I think what I wish I would have known now is like, that's okay. Like it is okay. You're by the very nature of being a leader, especially of a large, complex organization, you're not going to have all the answers. And that's actually expected, right? And just being
Yeah.
okay with that and just recognizing the important thing is to recognize what you know and then what you don't know. And then if what you don't know is find others that do, surround yourself with people that do and that challenge your thinking. And so I think I didn't fully appreciate that earlier on in my career.
I love that. I love that. And, there's been a real push in recent years, especially for young women, right, to pursue education in science and technology. So much is growing there, right? So much growth. So you did, as you mentioned at the beginning, engineering at Stanford, and then came to Kellogg for your MBA. So how did the Kellogg MBA build on the foundation of your undergraduate studies? Please convince every single engineer to come to Kellogg.
Well, I think what engineering, it obviously was the technical skills, the focus on problem solving. What Kellogg did and my MBA did was just, it's almost like a capstone course, right? It's like pulling it all together and solving kind of big global problems in for me in business, right, which is my focus. And it wasn't the functional expertise, and not to say I didn't get a lot from my the course and work I did in marketing or finance or organizational behavior. I mean, those were all important, and you're going to that's sort of like a table stakes part of business school. For me, it was finding out who I am as a leader and really preparing me to lead. I felt like the experiences I got on campus through various clubs, the interactions I had with my peers from all different walks of life. I mean, very different than what I did in management consulting, where we were probably more similar. When I was at business school, you would have a physician, you would have an artist, you'd have someone from nonprofit.
Yes.
To be in that environment, kind of being forced in to work as teams was really amazing for me from a leadership development standpoint, because then you realize, what does it take to motivate folks who aren't necessarily just like you. And you'll find a lot of that at Kellogg, and that's a really good thing. And to be able to dedicate, I was fortunate. I went for 2 years. I look back, I'm like, gosh, that was kind of a selfish time, because I dedicated 2 years just on me. And what a great experience it was and continues to be at Kellogg.
Great, thank you. I love that as a message. And talking about people around you, there's here a question from one of your classmates, Catherine Nygren, saying, "Hi, Lisa, great to see my classmate and her success." And then she asked, "Can you talk about any challenges to your personal family life as you climb the ladder in your career? I often mentor younger women and would love your input."
Yeah, I think for me, it's great. I would say, like, the Kellogg community, it continues to be such a big part of my life, whether it be classmates, others in the healthcare field, in the geographies in which I travel. It's such a great community. And I think for me, and whether it be younger females or just anyone, as we're all trying to kind of juggle our lives, it's just being really focused on sort of what's important to you and just protecting that and making sure. And so I'm always very, cautious about when I say yes and when I say no, and being okay with saying no. And that's an important skill to develop. And then I think it also is, a mindset. And it's kind of a weird thing to say, Francesca, but people used to ask me the question, they all like work-life balance. Like, how do you have work-life balance? And I actually say, I don't believe in work-life balance. And which people are like, what? And I say, well, you know what it is you're basically creating conflict, because you're saying there's work and there's your life. And the way I frame it is, it's your life. And work is a piece of it. My family is a piece of it. My health is a piece of it. My friends are a piece of it. And when I stop kind of having this false conflict and able to sort of say, hey, this is my life. And it's sometimes I'm going to lean more into work or I'm going to lean more into my family. Then I'm just making choices along the way versus feeling like because I'm always going to fail. Or I found that kind of shift was really helpful for me as I thought about how I lived my life. It's just viewing it holistically as my life versus a false conflict.
Yeah, that's a
A
great
little
lesson.
philosophical for you, Francesca.
No, 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 it's a very good one, actually. I do love it. I do love it. Hopefully more will use it, more young women will listen to you. Now, coming back to Kellogg, I really appreciate, your participate in this chat and giving back to the Kellogg community by sharing your expertise. But you are so involved. There are so how else, how can the presence of Kellogg really still enrich your life and career?
Yeah, well, I'd say I'm a lifelong learner. Like that's so
Yes.
my involvement with Kellogg is part of which is I get a lot from it, whether I'm on campus and I'm interacting with students or I'm interacting with alums, and I have the great pleasure of serving on your global advisory board,
I love
as well
having you
as
there.
yeah, and it's great to think about Kellogg almost as a business, right? And think about what does it take to continue to be the successful business school that we all love and hold so dear. And I also have the great fortune of leading the healthcare at Kellogg
Yes.
board as well in that efforts with Craig. And for me, I just get a lot out of those engagements. I always have. It started when I was a recent grad at Kellogg. I joined the local alumni club in the Twin Cities, and before I know it, I was kind of running the thing. And it just, I get a ton from those interactions, whether it be interactions with students, fellow alum, and the faculty as well. And so it's how I kind of stay current with what's happening in the business world. And it's given me way more back than I've ever given to it.
Lisa, I so love how we're finishing because we are running out of time, but I love that fact. And like as a message also to do the alumni, right? Stay in touch, do it. And there's a lot that you can get out of it by talking to the recent student, by talking to faculty and so on. And also you can make a difference. You are making so much a difference at Kellogg. And I'm so grateful. Like as I say, we are on track. We feel we are really the best, but can we be undisputed, completely
The
recognized?
undisputed leader, and Francesca, congratulations. I saw the great news about Kellogg being named the #1 business school by
Yes,
Poets and Quant.
yes.
So it is great. And you've just done a tremendous job sort of reclaiming, if you will, Kellogg's rightful place as a leader in business education.
Yes, no, thank you, because this is where Kellogg belongs. But I can only do it with alums like you, right? Getting you coming back, helping us, informing us. That's what we call the Kellogg full circle, and you're a perfect example of that. So thank you so much for today. I apologize to all the questions I didn't take, but there were so many and very interesting. But it's been so interesting to listen to you. I felt, I didn't appreciate so much of how interesting your job is. So I will now, next time I see you, ask you more. Thank you for being here and all the alumni listening. Thank you and have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.